In the last section, we finished up a quick aside on how we can work with JSON data. We created that image model class we placed down here at the bottom of our Dartpad code. We're now going to flip back over to our code editor, and we're going to make a new file that's going to house a image model class that we're going to create for our project. Once we get that class put together, we'll then make our actual API request over to that JSON typeicode fake API endpoint. We'll get our image, we'll assign it to the image model, and then we can figure out how to show it on the screen. So I'm going to get started by flipping back over to my code editor. I'm going to make a new file inside of a new folder that I'm going to place inside of my SRC directory. So inside of SRC, I'm going to make a new folder called models. And then inside there, I'll make a new file called image_model.dart. So now inside of here, we're going to basically write out this same code we just saw over on Dartpad. So I'll do class image model. It's going to have an ID that's going to be an integer type. I'll give it a string of URL and a string of title as well. Now remember, I'm not making these property names up right here. These are the exact property names that are coming from the JSON that represents one of our images from that fake API. So here's ID right here. It's always going to be an integer. We have the title of the image, which is a string, and we have the URL, which is a string as well. We could store the thumbnail URL in album ID properties, but they're really just not relevant to what we're doing at all, so we're just going to completely ignore those other properties. So then inside of here, we'll first set up our constructor with the same name as the class. So I'll say image model, and I will accept this.id, this.url, and this.title, like so. So we now have the ability to create a new image model instance by directly supplying an ID, a URL, and a title. We're going to also add on our named constructor that we'll call from JSON. So we have the ability to create an image model instance either by using this constructor or from JSON. So we're going to receive an argument into this named constructor right here that we'll call parsed JSON. And then from that parsed JSON, we will update the ID, URL, and title properties. So I will say ID equals parsed JSON ID. I'll do URL of parsed JSON URL, and I'll do title of parsed JSON title. Oop, like so. Okay, so that is pretty much it. Now there's one quick thing I want to mention here. When you go and look at documentation around model classes like this that are meant to intercept JSON or take JSON data, you might see that the parsed JSON argument right here to our name constructor will be annotated with a type. So technically, when we parse some JSON with that JSON.decode function, the type that we get back is a map with type string and type dynamic, like so. So this is saying that you can call our name constructor from JSON with a map data structure. And remember, maps are like JavaScript objects, Ruby hashes, maps in Java, or similar. This is saying that we have a map with keys that are strings and values that are dynamic. So we don't really know what their values are. So when you look at documentation, you'll sometimes see this type annotation right here, and it's definitely worth putting on. One other quick note that I want to throw out there is that we used a kind of long form constructor right here. We can technically write a little bit more abbreviated structure for this name constructor. I'll show it to you very quickly. I do encourage you to use the longer form just because it's a lot more clear what's going on, but I'll show you the shortened form just in case you're curious, because you will sometimes see it in documentation. All right, so I encourage you to not write this code out. I'm just going to very quickly write it out for you. So we could have alternatively put down a colon and then wrote out, we could put down a colon after the closing parenthesis over here. And then we could have removed all these semicolons and instead put a comma after each one, a semicolon after the very last one, and then remove that semicolon. So then if I save this file, yeah, there we go. So what you see right here and right here totally identical syntax. Both work just fine. But personally, I think this is just way more clear. It's still like the same number of characters, right? It's the same amount of space. But in this case, you don't have to worry about like comma, comma, semicolon, and you don't have to worry about the colon as well. So the syntax I showed you, I think, is really clear and very obvious. You're going to see the syntax in some documentation, but I think it's just a little bit harder to wrap your head around. All right, so I am going to delete that alternate approach. Okay, so that's it. We've got our image model put together. Let's take a quick pause right here, come back to the next section, and we're going to figure out how to make our API request that's going to get some JSON data that we're going to load up into our image model. So I'll see you in just a minute.